Good morning still, everyone. I'm Mark Sanders. This presentation is going to be like 20 or 25 minutes, so if you have questions, stop me and we can have questions at the end, whatever makes sense for everyone. It's a short presentation. I had technical, but Will said everyone wants high-level fluff marketing stuff, so I had to change everything at the very, I'm just kidding. All right, next slide. All right, so next slide, Greg. So real quickly, the point of this is, understanding the misuse of the foundation of the trust of internet. One of the things that when we look at, the biological world, all of us have an immune system, right? And we have HLA tags that identify who we are, and we all have unique tags. And so your immune system understands who you are, and so the cells inside your body, it knows who you are. If something is inside your body that's not you, then your immune system knows that's not you, and it should fight that, right? That's the bad things that are in our bodies. Next slide. All right, and so the cyber realm is sort of like that, right? There's something that has to identify what's known, what's real, what should be there, what shouldn't be there, right? And that's what keys and certificates are. It gives us authentication, it gives us authorization. Keys and certificates say this is who should be here and this is who should not be there, right? But the thing about the cyber realm as opposed to the biological realm is we don't have an immune system. There's nothing that says, hey, this is good versus this is bad. Certainly there's some technologies that work on that, but there's nothing that's centralized like an immune system. And so did we really solve the very first internet security problem? And so some of us remember back in 1993, right, a long time ago. So on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, right? So you can act who you are, right? It's kind of funny if we think back to that long ago, right? That cartoon is still relevant today. All right, next slide, Greg. All right, and so if we look at, now granted, this slide's a little bit of a fluff, I'll admit, but if we look at the foundation of all these technologies, right, keys and certificates and DNS, that sort of is the foundation of all of the other security systems. And so if not everything is going to rely on keys and certificates or DNS, but they all use keys and certificates or DNS in some sort of manner, right? And so obviously HTTPS, SSH, SFTP, the ability to understand where I'm going and should I go there and do I trust this particular place or entity with which I'm communicating. And so if either keys and certificates or DNS breaks, then we have bigger problems, right? We don't know who to trust. We don't know how to get there. We don't know name resolution. So these are the problems that happen if you have either a problem with keys and certificates or with DNS. Also, those are two great places to attack. If you look at keys and certificates, if you can compromise that identity, then you look like you're trusted. Same thing with DNS. If I can spoof DNS, then I can get to where, or I can trick people to come to where they think they're going, but they're really not going there. All right, so if we look at, from a historical view, the weaponization of keys and certificates, it all started in 2010 with Stuxnet and Duku. The way that I kind of describe this in my Texas mentality is this is sort of what let the cat out of the bag, right? Because that very first attack using keys and certificates was an eye-opener. And so we thought, it showed the bad guys what they could do, right? Like, oh, if I can compromise a key and certificate, or if I can get someone to go to someplace using a key and certificate and they're trusted, that's a pretty good attack vector. And so then what happened, because of Stuxnet and Duku, then I'm not going to, you guys know all these things that happen, right? It was an evolution, and it got worse and worse and worse and worse every single year. And so what happened is, once, like we said, this was sort of like the blueprint for it all, and then, more and more attack vectors have happened because of Stuxnet and Duku sort of laying that framework for this is how you can use an attack. Next slide. All right, we've all beat Heartbleed to death, but one quick point about Heartbleed is that with Heartbleed, we all know what it was. Right? It was a vulnerability in OpenSSL. What happened with, we all know, right? You could get the data out, extraction of data, and then what happened was Bruce Schneier said that the SSL and TLS keys and certificates must be assumed compromised. A little side topic here for all of us that love technology. When Heartbleed happened, two of the folks that we work with, they actually acquired some equipment that was found, where Heartbleed was identified, and we set up a lab and we tried to find out how long it would take before we could extract a private key out of a session. We thought it would take us a couple of hours, maybe even a day before we'd get a private key. It actually took us less than 30 minutes before we found that private key. Yeah, it was eye-opening, right? And it was the nature of Heartbleed, right? You're just capturing data as it was coming out, and lo and behold, when a private key came out. So, next slide, please. And so, right, the thing that had to happen, so you had to patch the vulnerable systems, you had to assume all keys and certificates were compromised, generate new keys and certificates, and then make sure that those changes, you've done the remediation, and make sure that you've actually done that. So this validation piece was very important. And so what we did a year later, next slide. One more, Greg, for me. So in April of 2015, what we did is we looked and we saw how many systems that were vulnerable to Heartbleed actually had been remediated. And the numbers, we were kind of shocked at how many actually hadn't been remediated even a year later after Heartbleed. And so, the thing about this is, what we found was it's harder to remediate these systems than a lot of people thought it was, right? Because it just sounds easy, patch some systems, and a lot of people patch systems, but they didn't rotate keys and certificates. And it's pretty simple to find out, it's simple for us to find that out, and it's also simple for a bad guy, because if you see a system that was patched, but you see a key and certificate that was issued before Heartbleed Day, then you know it wasn't remediated, right? And so that's just, it's gold, it lets you know right away. All right, next slide. I'm going really fast. This is going to be like a 10-minute presentation. I'm going to slow down. All right, so then Drown happened, right? And so Drown was a little bit more complicated. Go ahead and build it out. I think 2 more clicks, Greg, and 1 more. And so the thing about Drown that made it more difficult was that in your minds you're thinking, okay, well, it's only SSL if I've got SSL v2. But what happened, it even impacted you if you had TLS 1.2 as long as you're still using RSA. And so the problem, from the exposure and severity level, it was marked as significant because it wasn't just, okay, I've got to patch, I've just got to do an SSL v2 patch. We had to disable those and then rotate the keys and certificates. So it made it a lot more complicated than just saying I've got to do just a simple patch, like, not a simple, but it was a little bit more complicated than previous problems. And so this was, any SSL TLS enabled service. So we had to make sure the SSL v2 was disabled. And certainly we all know SSL v2 is bad. It's been bad for a while, but there are still so many systems that just have SSL v2 enabled for various reasons, just because no one's looking at it, or we've got legacy systems. There, just issues with that. Next slide. So there was the remediation. All right, so here's the interesting thing. When we talk about keys and certificates and how the bad guys have found out about these things, it sounds all theoretical, right? Until you start digging in this, and once you dig into it, it starts, it gets bigger, you're opening Pandora's box because you just find more and more things. So, the price tag on the buy market for a good key and certificate is about $1,000. And we all know that a credit card number or a social security number is worth about $5. So that kind of gives you the idea of the magnitude of what they value a social security number or a credit card versus a certificate. And I'll show you some examples of this. The other thing that's interesting is that number seems kind of staggering. Right? So in 2013, the average enterprise had 18,000 certificates. Now it's up to 25,000. When people hear that number, some people are going, there's just no way you've got that many keys and certificates. But if you think about it, think about where keys and certificates are. I did, at Black Hat, did a presentation, and there was probably about 75% of this size crowd, and it was at 9 o'clock in the morning. And so I started the presentation. I was like, how many people in this room think that they've already used a key and certificate? It's 9 o'clock. Who's used a key and certificate? And about half the audience raised their hand. And I go, okay, really, for those of you that didn't raise your hand, are not participating, or do you really not believe you used a key and certificate yet this morning? And then another half raised their hand. Okay, for those of you that haven't raised your hand, I want to introduce you to an iPhone, I want to introduce you to an Android phone. I want to introduce you to a laptop. Right? And it's just, their keys and certificates are everywhere. And so if you add all of those things up, that's where you're getting to these 25, 50, 75, 100,000 certificates. They're everywhere. They're all through our lives everywhere. I'll pause there for questions. Sometimes I get a hand thrown up on that particular topic. Yes, sir.
So is that count certificates that are like managed by the enterprise, or they're just present? It's like the iPhone example. How many are those, like mobile device management certificates, or are they just certificates within the Apple?
Right. Yeah. So the question was, is this large number just certificates that are just roaming inside an enterprise, or does this actually the certificate is owned by the enterprise? That is a certificate that's owned by the enterprise. Yeah. If you take into consideration just certificates that are just there, then it grows exponentially. It'd be a way bigger number. Yeah. All right. Next slide, please, Greg. All right, so Intel said this was last year. They said stealing certificates will be the next big market for hackers, because with that, if I have a key and certificate, then what can I do with that? It's the things that you can do. One of our clients, I was working with the PKI team, and they were having a hard time. This is a hardware manufacturer, and they were having a hard time getting executives to understand the significance of keys and certificates. They're like, yeah, we get it. Keys and certificates, that we have to buy them, and when they get installed, it just authenticates. We get it. They're like, no, you really don't understand how important these things are. And so we had to come up with a way to explain to the executives. And so the message that this particular person came up with told the executives, said, can you imagine our hardware is used by our federal government? Can you imagine if an attacker was able to take one of our certificates, act as if they were us, install malware, right? So it's signed by us. It says you are company X, and then we have, a congressman, a senator, someone that installs this software, says, I trust this piece of software because it's signed by company X. That's what a certificate does. Now this software has now been signed by us. It looks like us, and the person's like, oh, I get it now, right? So it's people understanding what the bad guys can do with the certificate. It's the stories, you have to really think through these things. Yes, sir.
So will the Internet of Things drive the market for certificates through the roof?
I don't have anything on this particular. So the question was, is the Internet of Things going to drive the certificate numbers through the roof? Absolutely. We see, we are now working with clients that are doing Internet of Things. We've got clients that are putting certificates on oil rigs and putting on sensors. You and I were speaking earlier. It's not even on device to device. It's on one device, a subcomponent communicating to another subcomponent. They need to do mutual authentication between these components. And so we're seeing, it's 25,000. That number is small now. It's millions of certificates when we talk about the Internet of Things. All right, next, please. All right, so here is an actual site that we took a picture of where there's a Russian hacker that is selling a stolen certificate for $980. And then you'll notice, we put 400 times more valuable than a stolen credit card and 3 times more valuable than Bitcoin. And Greg, I think the next, so this one is really interesting here. So what happened on this particular site is that you can purchase this code signing certificate, but if you don't believe that this is a real code signing certificate, click your next button. This guy will actually sign a piece of code for you to show you that you're buying a real code signing certificate, so you can actually test it before you buy it. And I thought that's pretty impressive. This guy's a good sales guy and hacker, right? So, all right. So this one we all know, we all remember, our government and the Apple thing, right? The really thing that's interesting here is, this is Congress. We're writing with several questions concerning digital certificates. These are folks that don't have any idea about security, clueless, right? But the very first line is concerning digital certificates. So if they're getting involved with it, we've got, obviously, in the next slide, please, Greg. So this line is very interesting, right? Because now we're starting to get into, not only are we worried about the keys and certificates in our environment, we now are worried about who we trust, right? Because now we have certificate authorities that are either making mistakes, doing bad things, right? There's just misuse at that level. So next slide, please. So this is CNIC. And so this is a Chinese certificate authority that is actually a part of the government. So we can all imagine the things that you can do there, right? So if you are an oppressive government and you now have a certificate authority that's trusted, I can now do man-in-the-middle attacks across my entire populace, right? I can see every bit of traffic. They think they're going to Google. They think they're going to Facebook. They think they're going to any of the spaces that they want to go in this, where they think they're being secure. And he's looking at every single, not him individually, but they can now man-in-the-middle attack every single site the entire population goes to. Next slide. So, interesting part here is CNIC is actually trusted in this room, not just in China, right? It's trusted in your computer, your browser, your smartphone, and your servers. It is embedded in the roots into your systems right now. Next slide, please. Go ahead and build this one out for me. So, MCS Holdings is an intermediate CA for CNIC. So, in 2015, when this whole story was broken, what we did at Black Hat, we asked all the people, not all, but we asked a lot of people that stopped by the booth. We told them about CNIC. We said, what do you think about that? Do you think that's a problem, right? And if that is a problem, what do you think is the worst thing that they could do, right? And so 58% of the people said that they don't think it's a problem and they could do a man-in-the-middle attack. There 14% said that there's replay attacks. 6% said there's no risk, which was crazy, right? And then 22% said they don't know. So this just kind of kind of gave us we're talking Black Hat, right? And so if you're talking about a certificate authority that can have visibility and do man-in-the-middle attack anywhere, they can get DNS traffic, that's a problem. Next slide. So here is what browsers, right, and platforms actually still trust CNIC. So 4 times. So it's untrusted by Google, untrusted by Mozilla, trusted by Apple, and trusted by Microsoft, right? So if you go into your roots, you'll find CNIC and MCS Holdings is a trusted CA in those platforms. Next slide. All right, and so here, what action did your organization take after CNIC was deemed untrusted? So you can see the majority of folks were waiting for Microsoft and Apple to take action. A lot of folks removed CNIC from their roots. Then no action was taken. And then once again, a large majority says we just don't know. All right, next slide, please. All right. So when we look at this particular slide has a lot of ways that you can talk about this. But if you look at the awareness and visibility detection and the ability to respond, a lot of solutions, our traditional security solutions, they do a very good job at their intended purposes. But if you look at the organizations that haven't really put a lot of focus on keys and certificates, it's down here, right? And so number one, because we haven't paid a lot of attention to them, it is a good attack vector, right? But then also, there's a whole we can go on about this for a while, but if you look at DLP, if you look at IDS, if you look at firewalls, if you look at IPS, the amount of traffic that's now coming into our networks that's encrypted, those solutions are not decrypting that traffic. They see the traffic coming in. If it's unencrypted, they do their job. But if it's encrypted traffic, what do? They let it right on through. Right? And so that's creating blind spots because if it's encrypted, they're letting it through. Now, granted, I'm sure some of you in this room, some of your organizations are saying if it's encrypted, we're going to block it. But that opens up a whole lot of other problems because if somebody doesn't get their mail, if some application stops working because it's encrypted and you don't have the private key to decrypt it, then you've got problems. But that creates a lot of problems because those other solutions just physically or technically can't do their job because they don't have visibility into that encrypted traffic or those tunnels. Any questions on that topic?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around it with, if they're an untrusted CA, they don't operate just in China, right? They could have stuff in the US where we're connecting stuff, so essentially it could be a worldwide issue. Right?
It is a worldwide issue,
So,
yeah.
A certificate from them today, I think.
Yes.
So
Where do you want to
essentially,
be? In Google?
yeah. So essentially, say my bank bought the certificate through them. all my stuff, they could essentially be man in the middle
Correct.
between those.
Well, or they can man the middle of you.
It would impersonate your bank,
Right. Right.
and it would look like your bank.
So the comment was, if we go back to the, CNIC, they're trusted, but we shouldn't trust them, right? So they shouldn't be trusted, but yet what if someone were to, if my bank or someone I'm doing business with, what if they actually had a CNIC certificate? What does that do to me, right? Well, that opens you up for either man-in-the-middle attack, or what if someone were to impersonate the bank that you thought you were doing business with, and then you could actually, they're capturing that traffic instead of it going to your bank. So that's the problem with having trusted CAs that shouldn't be trusted, or them issuing certificates that they shouldn't issue. And I skipped over this point, I apologize. The reason CNIC got in trouble is not just because they're from China, they could be bad guys. No, they actually issued a Google certificate, not to Google. So if you issue a Google certificate and you are a certificate authority that's trusted, right? That means anyone that goes to that Google site, even when they think it's Google, it's not. You're going to get the little green lock. Yes, this traffic is secure, welcome to Google, and you're not at Google, right? That's what that means.
Can I go back? I'm still stuck on that huge number you gave from a while ago, about 25,000 certificates.
Okay.
But if we were to divide them into two categories, you got the ones issued by well-known, public, and trusted CAs.
Right.
And then you have self-signed and internal CAs. If you divide that number up, I have a hard time believing 25,000 are issued by well-known, trusted CAs.
Very, very good point. Absolutely good point. So the question was that big number of 25,000, how many of that, what percentage of that was issued by a public certificate authority versus how many are coming from like your internal Microsoft CA for just your internal self-sign, those sorts of things? Perfect question, thanks. We typically see about a 75-25% ratio, right? And it depends on the organization, right? So if we talk about, certificates that are on laptops and desktops, those are certainly going to be issued from a Microsoft certificate authority, right? Or OpenSSL, whatever the case may be. And then you've got self-signed certificates on network devices, those sorts of things. It also depends on the client or the type of enterprise and the space that they're in, right? Because if you've got someone that doesn't have a huge web presence, then it doesn't get, the public certificates don't really, you don't get those big numbers. But so, not to talk about our company, but when if I just in my mind try to think through the numbers of certs, we'll have anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 or 6,000, 7,000 public certs, and then the big numbers are on those private, on the internal certs.
Okay. Then the follow-up question: these certificates that are on sale that hackers are trying to obtain, that's almost totally focused maybe on public CA issued certificates, or is there any interest in stealing the internal piece?
They're interested in stealing the internal as well, because think of if I have a self-signed certificate that's signed by whomever.
Maybe I said it wrong. There was always the interest in there, but where is the predominant interest today?
The predominant is from public certificate authorities, you're right. So the question was, the bad guys, what types of certificates are they trying to steal? Is it something that's an internal certificate? Like, if you stole Mark Sanders' laptop certificate, what can you really do? There's some bad stuff you could do, but if I could steal company XYZ certificate, then I could do a whole lot more, especially if it's issued by Symantec or DigiCert, et cetera. Yeah. Yes, sir.
As a user, is there any way for you to tell that your public certificate is compromised, or is it just like once they enter?
So the question was, is there a way as a consumer if you can tell if there's been a breach with a certificate authority, right? Not really. We all get the news, and that's sort of the bad things happen, right? So there was a CA that they had employees that issued 3 bad certificates, and no one knew about it until they went public with it. And the CEO came out and said, "I'm sorry, we should have done it, and I fired these 3 people." I mean, that's a terrible, in my opinion. That's not, he should have said, "Hey, we're going to fix our policies and procedures," instead of saying we're going to fire, instead of firing those 3 guys. But we don't know about it until it's, Yes, sir.
What's the relative value of public versus private certificates? $1,000 as for the public.
Right. So the question was, what's the dollar value of the public versus the private? I don't have a dollar for you on the private. Those numbers we're seeing on the 1,000, those are all publicly trusted. Yeah. Any other questions? All right, I think I have one more slide. All right, so this is from Gartner. They're saying that 50% of network attacks will use SSL by 2017. To give a little bit more technical depth on that comment, what they're saying is that they will use the attack will have some sort of relevance to SSL, whether it's going to be an attack, if it's going to be attacked with a certificate, if it's going to be embedded in an SSL session, TLS session, just somehow the attack will have some level of SSL and TLS involved in it, by 2017. That's what they're predicting. All right, so my final slide for you all is, go ahead and build it all out, Greg. This is Venafi material, but this is something that we've put together over the years when we talk to folks like yourself, when we talk to organizations. This has nothing to do with our product. This is just all, just PKI, keys and certificates, best practices. What we typically see when we start working with an organization is that they will find themselves in one of these levels or a maturity milestone, right? And so what we see is that the goal is to be at a level 4, right, where you can respond if something bad happens. I can have immediate response. I've got visibility. I know where things are. But oftentimes we start working with organizations. We'll find them. We start working with them. They'll find themselves at level 0, maybe level 1, bridging into level 2. But level 1 is really, I've got unquantified risk. I don't know where things are. I don't know the state of things. I don't have a baseline. I've got no automation. It's just, things are pretty bad. And then level 1, you'll notice that it says known and trusted keys and certificates. What we do there is we say, let's look at what the certificate authorities have said they've issued you, and let's look at that as your baseline, right? And then that's your known. And then let's jump over to your critical infrastructure. So we now know what's known. Now let's start looking at all of the critical infrastructure. Maybe there's some unknowns there, right? And then let's get those under control. Then we get enterprise-wide. Let's find everything across the entire enterprise, bring automation in place for everything all across the enterprise. And then finally, level 4 is the ability to respond. You've got complete automation, complete visibility. Auditors are happy. Inventory, integration into the various systems that are necessary. You've got a very good place for remediation if something bad happens, to the gentleman in the back's point. All right, I think that's it. Yep. Yes, sir.
Question. As clients maybe move more toward a cloud-based presence as opposed to an on-prem presence,
yes,
how does that change the dynamic of keys and certificates?
So the question is, as organizations move towards more of a cloud-based infrastructure, what does that do with keys and certificates? It actually increases the use of keys and certificates. Because now where those keys and certificates were in the data center, now we put those keys and certificates in the cloud, right? And now we also need to have something that secures our transaction from our infrastructure over to the cloud, right? Which again uses keys and certificates. So we're just really moving the keys and certificates from one place to another. Now what it also does for us, it adds a level of complexity. Because in the data center, we had our physical machines, we had our virtual machines, we stood them up. They were up for 6 months, up for a year, up for 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. We installed the key and certificate and we were good with it until it expired. Well, now in the cloud, we've got systems that are up for a minute or two, or maybe for an hour or two, right? So how do I get keys and certificates installed on those machines that are only going to live for a very brief period of time? Or let's say for scalability, it's Christmas time and we're a retailer and I need to spin up 1,000 machines that fast. How do I get 1,000 machines spun up plus 1,000 keys and certificates? So all of those sorts of things happen, and you've got to have the ability to respond to that rapid ups and downs.
Is it inherent on the client to have those keys and certificate, or does the cloud provider provide those keys and certificates?
So the question was, is it up to the organization to provide those keys and certificates, or does the cloud provider provide those keys and certificates? So Amazon, several months ago, introduced their certificate authority. but you can still, it's still the same, the paradigm is if you want to go to the gentleman's point there, if you're doing something that's just internal, you're not interfacing with the public, then you could use internal certificate authority. But if I go down the path of that online retailer, then they need a certificate from a publicly trusted certificate authority. And so it's the same notion of getting that signed certificate from the CA and then installing that onto those systems. Yes, sir.
So without turning it into a sales pitch, what is your all solution for that?
For that particular use case or just in general?
In general.
So in general, we basically, if I kind of go back to that maturity milestone slide, we obviously, if we built this slide, we do all that stuff, right? So we take our clients from, they don't know where keys and certificates are, there's no automation, there's no processes, procedures, you have no approval process, so we get things under control. We find everything that's out there and then start building automation and process, and then start working through tying into all the certificate authorities, making sure that you have owners, all of those sorts of good things. And then when we jump over to the final piece, where the ability to remediate, if there is a compromise, if something bad were to happen with our system, you can push a button and we'll rotate keys and certificates for you programmatically. So that's kind of what we do. And to your point, when there's hyperscale, we have APIs that systems can call into us. Puppet Chef, we can send out thousands of certs very, very quickly. So that's questions. Just saw a friendly face right there. Yes, sir.
The whole process of having the top 3 level CAs and then revocation process, do you see that getting any better or changing? It's kind of up to them to say if we screwed up or something like that.
Right. So the question was, as far as revocation goes and the certificate authorities, do we see that getting better because they're sort of, they're responsible for revocation, they're responsible for, cleaning, maintaining their own house, if I can say it that way. We do see it getting better. We don't know exactly, Google certificate transparency, right, is a step in the right direction, we feel. And so there'll be things that will come out, as we progress. We don't see SSL TLS going away because it's just so embedded, and there's good things about it. But with Google CT, Google's doing a good job for certificate transparency. But so, will revocation go away? I don't, not in the near term, we don't believe so. Questions?
Well, I have one here.
Yes, sir.
For administrator and for cost savings, to make it easier and to save money, you might want to buy a wildcard certificate. I like that.
Yep.
But what are the problems with having one certificate that you use for all systems?
Right. So the question was, with wildcard certificates, they're very easy because you get this one wildcard certificate and you can install it on any number of servers and it just works great. But are there problems with that? I'll tell you a story. We worked with a particular client that they said, we've got a wildcard certificate. It's going to expire in about 2 months and we just don't know where all it's located. And so we asked them, well, can't you've got Qualys, you've got, Rapid7, you've got things you can discover, right? Find it. Well, we don't really know because we have all these disparate systems and things, we just don't have any idea where this thing is. And so we worked with them and we found out that, they thought this wild card was going to be in a couple of hundred locations. It turned out to be in several thousand locations. So that's one problem with a wild card, just because you just don't know where things are, right? And the problem that happens with that is, from a certificate authority perspective, I'm an administrator, I get that certificate from the CA, and then I hand it to the administrator who's going to install it on his or her system. And then I don't know what they do with it after that. They could just copy it machine to machine to machine, or it could be built into some sort of script. And so, now it's being pushed out to just machines everywhere. And so that's one problem with it. So that's the operational problem, right? But from the security and risk problem is that if I compromise that one certificate, you know where that goes, right? Especially if it's a wild card with a 1-year validity or a 2-year validity period, I've now got 2 years before you're going to start looking for it, right? And I got 2 years to do bad things. So that's the problem with wild cards. Well, if you ask my personal opinion, our company's recommendation, and instead of using wild cards, let's use SANS, right? And that, yeah. Any other questions? All right. Hey, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time.